Okay, I'd like to introduce on this broadcast Colonel Jeffrey Fischer, who is a U.S. Army veteran, also was part of the NATO Special Operation Force from Rome. Colonel Fischer, thank you very much for your time. I'm sure you've been seeing the news that's come in from India that tomorrow we're also going in to conduct mock drills with civil defense volunteers across the country. And Colonel Fischer, I'd just like to begin by asking you a question that's, I think, on the mind of every Indian right now, about what these mock drills mean and whether it directly translates to a country getting ready for war.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. I commend the Indian government for actually doing mock drills because I think they're important, right? This is training, and this is I think that the people of India should look at this as an opportunity to prepare for something that is something that people, it's distasteful to talk about being attacked, and it's not fun, and it's very fearful. So a couple things that people should be thinking about is what can they do, right? What can they do to prepare for a crisis like this?
You know, Colonel Fischer, how important is it to have these civil defense volunteers fully prepped, fully equipped? I think there's also what it does, essentially, these mock drills, is it does create a creeping sense of panic, perhaps. You know, while I know full well it's an awareness drive, there is also a sense of panic that, look, does this mean that we're headed to war?
It is going to bring fear and panic into the people, and I would ask, right, the people of India to actually take a deep breath and look at this more as an opportunity to actually take steps that they can take in their houses and prepare for the inevitability. And I will tell you that when people take steps and prepare for things like this, as opposed to sit around and just stew on it or get lost in their fear and their concern, is it's a far better path.
I completely agree with you, Colonel Fischer. Always better to be prepared. I'd also like to introduce Colonel Fischer, my colleague Ashutosh Mishra, who has a question for you. Ashutosh, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel Fischer. Before I ask your expertise on about the rescue operations, the evacuation operations, and particularly for the civilians to save themselves during such areas, the first question that comes in mind, that how do you see this escalation in the east between two nations after India is determined to avenge this Pahalgam terror attack by Pakistani terrorists?
Yeah, look, what's going on between India and Pakistan, I think, has gathered the world's attention. Right, you're on the world stage. There's a lot of people who are watching this closely. I was listening to your report a little bit earlier, and what I find heartening, especially as an American veteran, is a lot of the military equipment that India is using right now, the P-8 Poseidon, the MQ-9 Reaper drone. These are U.S. weapon systems, and they're exceptional. And I think India is well placed and well positioned should war break out to make sure that one of her closest allies right now and one of her good partners is the United States.
But having covered certain wards, Colonel Jeffrey, I remember that in Israel, despite having this, air defense system, Iron Dome, multiple times the projectiles fired by the adversaries, by Hamas or by the Houthis in Yemen, they did landed in the localities, in the civilian areas. And in that case, since India is preparing for a mock drill, how would you advise the civilians, in your expertise, the best plans to evacuate, to rescue, to find safer places, both in the public places as well as if you are in the civilian areas? Colonel?
Sure, that's a great question. There's a couple things that the Indian people can do, right? The first thing I would do is I would actually sit down and build your plan. And what I mean by building a plan is find a room in your residence that is the safest room, right? What is the safest room for you to be in? That would be a room with limited doors, no windows, more internal in a building, maybe a basement, something like that. Then I would also plan on getting 2 to 3 days of emergency supplies, and I'm not talking about necessarily just food, but I'm talking about water, I'm talking about batteries, and I'm talking about medicine and things like that. Make sure you have a good supply of that and put it in that safe room, for lack of a better term. The other thing I would do is, and we don't think about this very often, is I would have a radio, right? I would have an AM FM radio because power can go out. Make sure there's good batteries in it, and make sure that you're tuned into that radio station that the government's going to be broadcasting emergency instructions on. Because once something like this happens, you're going to want instructions, and you can't count on the power and the internet and mobile phones to be working. The last thing I would recommend if you're at home would be to actually make sure that you have an established meeting place away from the building.
Yeah.
Should something inevitable happen to the building and the safe room has been compromised, you want to be able to get out and have a rally
these
point.
These are
for those your
important
loved ones.
pointers that you're giving us, Colonel. But I have to move on this broadcast. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Ashutosh, for joining us as well.